Okay, welcome to a sample lesson that I would give for a level 1 beginner course. So in this lesson, we are going to talk about personal pronouns. Now, just about every language has personal pronouns, and they're the building blocks of the language because they determine what form your verbs are going to be in, and they also let you know who is doing the action in the sentence. So this is a very good place to start when you're learning a new language. Start with your personal pronouns. Now in English, our personal pronouns are I, you, he and she, we, y'all, or you all, or you guys, whichever one you use depending on what region you're from, and finally, they. So typically, these are the personal pronouns that you'll encounter in the English language. And it's important to know these, as I said, because they determine what form of the verb you will use. For example, let's take the verb to be, okay? Let's take the verb be, for example. When you are going through each of these personal pronouns, you are going to change this verb in order to match that pronoun. For example, you would not say I be, you would say I am. You would not say you be, you would say you are. And you would also not say he be or she be, you would say he or she is, and so on and so forth. You have to use the correct form of the verb depending on which pronoun is doing the verb, because the I or the you, he or she or whatever lets you know who is doing the verb, and then you must change the form of the verb. See, you have to say am instead of be, are instead of be, and so on and so forth. Now, changing the form of the verb to match the pronoun that is doing the verb, that is something known as conjugation, okay? And it's important to be able to do that properly and understand what conjugation is, because you will see a lot of that in Spanish. In my years in the classroom, I can say that the ability to conjugate a verb is probably about 55% of what it takes to know the Spanish language. So, that was just a quick example in English of personal pronouns. Now, when we go over to Spanish, we actually have about 12 personal pronouns, but you're really only going to use about 10 of them in most conversation. But you've got 12 personal pronouns that have very similar meanings to all of the ones presented here in English, except these are a little more specific because they will make distinctions in terms of gender or in terms of if you're talking to an elder or a younger person. But we're going to go through these slowly so that you understand them and don't get confused or intimidated. Like I said before, the only way to learn a language is through good old-fashioned hard work, but just take your time and don't stress out about it. Just make sure that you study these, okay? So the first pronoun that we see in Spanish is yo, okay? And because I have an Argentinian slash Chilean slash Spaniard accent, I say yo, okay? So if you hear me say yo in my later lessons, know that I mean this word right here, yo, okay? Yo means I. It's pretty straightforward, okay? So far, so good. Now the next one is tú, okay? And you have to put that accent mark over your U. Putting that accent mark over the U makes your letter more authoritative. You're saying it harder, okay? So it's not tu, it's tú, okay? Got to say it with some authority, all right? This means you, okay? Like, you know, you did this, you would start with tú. But the thing is, there are two ways to say you in Spanish. The first one is tú, and you use this if you are in a familiar situation, okay? What does that mean? if you're saying you, but you're talking to, a buddy, or you're talking to a coworker, or you're talking to one of your children, okay? If you're in a familiar situation where you're talking to someone that you're comfortable with, you would say tú. However, the other way to say you, and I'm writing it this far down for a reason, the other way to say you is usted, okay? U-S-T-E-D, usted. This means you also, but this is in a more formal situation, okay? You would use usted if you were talking to your boss. Like you're talking to your boss and you say, sir, I need you to help me, okay? If you're talking to someone, you're a boss or a great grandparent or someone, it's a more formal situation, you would say usted, you would not say tú. And so when you conjugate your verb, if you're talking to a boss, you would use the usted form of that verb and not the tú form of that verb. Now, the other subject pronouns, él, okay, and you have to put your accent mark over the E, él, okay, means he. And ella, or I would say ella, means she, okay? Now you might be asking yourself, why is it that yo gets its own box? Why is it tú gets its own box, but él, ella, and usted have to share a box? Why is that? The reason is because in Spanish, when you're conjugating your verbs, you use the same conjugation for él as you do for ella and for usted. They all use the same conjugation. Kind of like over here in English, you notice how you use are for all four of these, for we, you, y'all, and they. Well, if we were doing this 6 box the same way we were doing this box over here, we would have put all of those in the same category. The only reason I spread them out is to avoid confusion and make it simpler. But in Spanish, the el form of the verb, the ella form of the verb, and the usted form of the verb all use the same form. So don't get confused with that. Now we move over to the right side of the box. Over on this side of the box, everything is plural, whereas over on this side of the box, everything is singular, okay? So the first personal pronoun that's plural is nosotros, okay? That's masculine, by the way. If it's feminine, it's nosotras. And what do these mean? They both mean we, okay? So don't be confused. If you see nosotros, that means we, but the group, it's a group of guys, okay? If you see nosotras, that means we, but it's a girl talking and she's saying we, the girls, or we, the group of girls. Now you might ask yourself, well, what if it is a group that has both girls and guys in it? And the answer is you would just use the masculine. You would just use nosotros, all right? Now, the next pronoun follows just about the same pattern. This one, vosotros, is masculine, or vosotras is feminine. And both of these mean y'all, okay? Both of these mean y'all. But this y'all is familiar, okay? So let me see if I can find some space to put that under here. This is a familiar way of saying y'all. So using vosotros, you would use that if you're talking to a group of friends or a group of peers. Hey guys, let's go out to eat, okay? You're talking to a group of friends, obviously someone you're more comfortable with. You would say, hey you all, hey guys, or whatever. You would use vosotros if you're talking to a group of guys. You would use vosotras if you're talking to a group of girls. If you're talking to a group that has both genders, you would use vosotros. So in Spanish, when in doubt, if you have both genders, just use the masculine form and everything will be okay. Now, I need to make a side note about vosotros. A lot of Spanish teachers and a lot of Spanish students think that it is unnecessary to learn vosotros. They think that vosotros is only used in Spain So it doesn't matter. You don't need to learn it. And it's true. Vosotros is only used in Spain, but it's also used in Argentina and Chile. And so they think, well, it's only used in that one country. We don't need to learn it. Well, you should learn it, because what if you go to Spain? And Spain, after all, is the country of origin of the language. So why wouldn't you want to learn the grammar that comes from the country of origin? That just makes no sense to me whatsoever. And my professors in Spanish were from Spain or Argentina and Chile, so I learned it. And because of that, you will learn it. And typically in Latin America, they don't use vosotros. They'll use another form that I'm about to teach you. But it's good to know it anyway, because you never know if you're going to encounter a Spaniard. And if you do, I want you to be prepared. So, we went over the fact that vosotros is the familiar way to say y'all. Well, the formal way to say y'all is ustedes, okay? This is formal, and it means y'all, okay? This would be like if you're talking to a group of elders, or if you're talking to a group of executives at your company and you're giving a presentation and you say, I'd like you all to look at this, okay? In any formal situation where you're trying to show respect, use ustedes. Now, an easy way to remember the difference between vosotros and ustedes is this. If you look at usted, that's the way to say you in the formal sense. Well, just add an es at the end. Now it's plural. Usted, ustedes. So this is just the plural way of addressing a person in the formal sense of the word. Okay? Now let's move on. The final two pronouns are ellos is masculine and ellas is feminine, and they both mean they, okay? If you're saying they, the guys, you would use ellos. If you're saying they, the girls, you would use ellas. And if you're talking about a group of people of mixed gender, which one would you use? You guessed it, you'd use ellos, the masculine form. And an easy way to remember ellos and ellas is just think about this. You have el, now you've put a los at the end, you've made it plural. El, now it's ellos. Ella, you've literally just slapped an S on the word for she, and now you get the feminine word for they. So these kind of parallel with each other in terms of the spelling. So that's an easy way to remember it. And remember that vosotros is informal, whereas ustedes is formal. Okay, so that is the personal pronouns. The personal pronouns let you know who is doing the action. Now let's move on. Here is a list, or another 6-box. I have already populated it with the different subject pronouns, or as we call them, personal pronouns. So what I'm going to do now is give you a bit of an understanding of typically how you can tell whether or not a verb is in the yo form, how you can tell whether or not a verb is in the to form, how you can tell whether or not a verb is in any of these other forms. Because in Spanish, you change the spelling of the verb when you conjugate it. You typically change the ending of the verb, and that will let you know who is doing the action. Let's take yo, for example. Typically, a verb that is in the yo form ends in an O without an accent mark. Okay, it's very important. If you have a verb that ends in an O with the accent mark, then it's really in the el, ella, usted form in the preterite tense, or a type of past tense. But don't worry about that for now. You're just starting, so we'll talk about that in a much later lesson. So let me give you an example. I'm going to use an example from all of these using the verb comer, okay? The verb comer means to eat. So if you see the verb and you see an example such as yo como, well, you should already know Because the verb ends in an O, that means that whatever this verb is, the person that's doing it is yo, or the person that's doing it is I. So look out for the endings of the verbs to know who is doing the verb. Now, for tú, it depends on what kind of verb you have, what kind of ending it'll have. It'll either end in S or as, typically. Now, there are other endings that it may come along with, but if it's an ER verb or an IR verb, typically it'll end in S, and if it's an AR verb, it will end in as. For example, if I were to say, let's continue with the verb comer. If I were to say comes, okay, you know that because the verb ends in S, because it has this ending, you know this verb comes from the to form of the conjugation. So you know it's saying you do something. We don't know what that is yet until we look at the first part of the verb and we see that this com is the same root as in here for comer. So we know that comer means to eat. So comes means you eat. So it's very important when you're going through these conjugations, the ending of the verb will let you know who is doing it, and the beginning of the verb will let you know what the action itself is. Now for él, ella, and usted, typically your endings are going to be and a. That's straightforward, okay? You'll see some exceptions, but that's when we get into the past tense, but we're not there yet. So we're going to take our time through this. An example would be if I said, él come, okay? See how we have this ending right here, just like right up here? So this ending means that he is doing the action, or she is doing the action, or you, formal, is doing the action. So how do we know which one of these is doing the action? Typically in Spanish, when you have a verb that has three kinds of possibilities to go along with it, they will specify which is doing the action beforehand. Other times, you'll just know from context clues. All right. Now let's move on to nosotros or nosotras. I put the as in parentheses over here so that you could know that it can be feminine. Now, typically an ending in the nosotros or nosotras form, which again, if you look at your notes, that means we. Typically verbs that are in the we form will end in amos, amos, or emos, okay? Depending on what kind of verb it is, if it's an ER verb or if it's an AR verb or if it's an IR verb, okay? But typically if it's ending in emos, it's talking about something you did in the past tense. But I just thought I'd show you that for now. For example, let's go to comer. How do you think we are going to take comer and put it in the we form? You would say comemos. Exactly. So this amos at the end right here lets you know that it is in the nosotros form or it's in the we form. So you know that whatever the verb is, it's we that are doing it. And the com here, this root, lets you know that it comes from comer. Okay, so the language itself is very logical and it makes sense. You just have to pay attention to your verb endings because they will let you know who is doing the action. Now let's move on to vosotros, or in other words, vosotras, if you're talking feminine. Typically, these endings are going to be ace, mind the accent mark over the E, ice, mind the accent mark over the A, or is, okay? And that I has an accent mark as well. Typically, these endings will mean y'all do something or y'all did something. Back to the verb comer. Same verb, we're just going to go through. because it's an ER verb, you would use the ending with the E here. You would say comes, okay? Notice how the EIS ending, the ACE ending, or the ICE ending, or EASE ending, notice how the ending, again, tells you who is doing the action. And I'm going to harp on this a lot. Look at the ending of the verb, and it will almost always tell you who's doing the action. And finally, we get to ellos, ellas, and ustedes. Typically, these will end in or on. Or if you're in the past tense, on. Okay? But like I said, we'll get to that in a later lesson, but it's really good to know from now because it will make learning the past tense even easier. Okay? So for example, taking the verb comer, you would say comen, okay? Comen, okay? That's how you say they eat, all right? So again, the ending lets you know who is doing the verb, and the beginning lets you know what the verb itself is. When you put those together, you will understand what is going on in the sentence. So it's very important for you to know those endings. All right, now let's move on. This is a little exercise that I want you beginners to try. So I want you to translate each of these sentences. Vives en España. And the vives right here comes from the verb vivir, meaning to live. Number 2, estamos en la casa. And estamos coming from the verb estar, meaning to be. And finally, habláis mucho. Habláis, of course, coming from hablar, meaning to talk. I'm giving you where the roots are coming from to make it easier. So go ahead, look at the endings of each of these verbs and see if from these endings you can find out who is doing the action, and because I've already told you what the action is, and then from there to be able to translate the sentence. Go ahead and pause the video and give it a few minutes if you need to. Unpause it when you're ready to continue. Okay, at this point, I assume that you have unpaused the video. You will know that vivir, meaning to live, if it's vives, ending in this es, you know it's in the tu form. And what does tu mean? It means you. So you know whatever it's the action is, you know it's you that are doing it. So you live in Spain. Okay? Pretty straightforward. The second one, you should know the amos is it comes from nosotros. It means it's in the nosotros form. So whatever the action is, well, we know what the action is to be. It's in the nosotros or the we form. So again, you wouldn't say we be, you would say we are, then in the house. Okay, pretty straightforward so far. Then for this last one right here, you should know that ending in ais, A-I-S, is in the vosotros form. So whatever the action is, it's y'all that are doing it. Well, look at the root right here. This comes from hablar, meaning to talk. So we know this means y'all talk a lot. Okay, that's what mucho means. Y'all talk a lot, or y'all talk often, or y'all talk much. Okay, so that's an example of a beginner's lesson that I would offer. Now let's move on to something that I would offer for the intermediate class. In the intermediate class, I assume that you already know about the present tense, the present progressive. You've already started learning the preterite and all of those things. We're going to talk about something called the perfect tense. What is the perfect tense? The perfect tense is used to convey the idea I have done, okay, or she has done, or so on and so forth, okay? Anytime you're talking about I have done this, or she has done that, or we have done this, or even if you're saying I haven't done this, or they haven't done that, anytime you're talking in those terms, it's called the perfect tense. And to form the perfect tense, you take the present tense form of the verb haber, okay? And then you add your past participle, okay? I assume that you already know what your past participles are. Your past participles are your verbs that end in ido, ado, hecho, otto, or so on and so forth. There are plenty of endings for the past participles, okay? Now, an example of a past participle would be the verb comer in the past participle becomes comido, all right? Or the verb hablar becomes hablado, okay? Those are your regulars. Anything ending in ido or ado is regular, but you have plenty of irregulars out there, ones that don't quite fit the mold. Hacer, which means to do or to make, for example, becomes hecho, all right? Romper, which means to break, becomes roto. Or, for example, decir, which means to say, becomes dicho, okay? So this means to make, this means made. This means to break, this means broken. This means to say, this means said, all right? And finally, escribir, which means to write, becomes escrito, okay? This means write, this means written. Like if you say, I have written. So this is eaten, spoken, done or made, broken, said, or spoken, rather, or written. So this is that part of the past participle. What about the have part? You need to say, I have made, or I have broken. Where does that have come from? It comes from the verb haber, which means have, but this is only have in the non-possessive way, okay? Okay, this means have in the non-possessive way. So the possessive have is like, you know, I have $3 or I have a cat. But that's not the kind of have we need. We need the kind of have that says like I have spoken or I have eaten. So that is haber. And how do you conjugate haber? In the yo form, it's e. In the to form, as. In the él, ella, usted form, a. So we're just going to continue. Hemos. You should already know what the pronouns are. Habéis. And on. Okay. So these will already let you know, okay, what who's doing the action. If it's on, you know it's they did it or you all did it formal. Let me connect my H there. Habéis means y'all did it or y'all have done it and so on and so forth. So with this information, you guys are ready to move on to some drills. Translate the following statements. Go ahead and pause the video if you need time. Ya hemos comido. No he escrito mi ensayo. ¿Por qué no lo habéis hecho? Okay, and I have right here what verbs they come from. If you're in Spanish too, you should already know what these verbs are. So go ahead and take a minute and then we'll come back. Okay, I assume you've paused the video and I assume that you're done so far. So let's move on and show what these actually mean. You know that ya means already. Hemos is in the nosotros form and comido is from comer, of course. So what this should mean is we have already eaten. Okay, we have already eaten. Now, for the second one, you know that A is in the yo form. So you know that this is saying that I have done something. But the no in front shows that it's I haven't done something. Well, what haven't you done? Well, you see escrito comes from escribir. Notice the same root. Okay, so escrito comes from escribir, which means to write. So this means I haven't written my essay, okay? And so you better get that turned in if you want to pass the class. But you get the example that I'm trying to show you. Now, the next one is a little more complicated, but don't be intimidated. You already know that HO comes from hacer, so it's made or done. You know that habéis, because it ends in ace, it's in the vosotros form, so it's y'all have done something. Or because of the no here, we know it's y'all haven't done something. So what haven't y'all done? Y'all haven't done it, okay? So this literally means why haven't y'all done it? Okay. Why haven't y'all done it? Or why haven't y'all made it? Okay. So you're talking to a group of irresponsible people and you really just want to get them into shape. So I expect you guys to go ahead and take out 501 Spanish verbs and just practice putting different verbs in the perfect tense. But this should be enough to get you started. All right. Now, this is something that I would put in my level 3, my more advanced classes, if you're in Spanish 3 or 4 or beyond. We're just going to talk about 3 uses for the verb haber today. Now, there are tons. Spanish has nearly a dozen uses for the verb haber, and it's quite awesome. It's why it's one of my favorite verbs in the Spanish language. But we're going to talk about how you use the haber to make the idea there is, to say there was or there were, and also to say there will be, okay? Because there's a special way that you use haber to say each of these. So for the first one, in order to express a thought there is, you use the third person singular of haber, which you would start off, you would think it'd be right? Like he has el a. However, you use a special version of it known as I, okay? That's what you would use. You would use I. I is a form of haber. It's in the same part of the 6 box as a, but it's only used to say there is or there are. For example, you could say, hay una tortuga en mi casillero, okay? Hay una tortuga en mi casillero. There is a turtle in my locker, okay? How it got there, I have no clue, but there's a turtle in my locker, and I'm probably going to sell it on eBay when I get home. Okay, so this is just one example. You would use I, and then just put whatever your subject of the sentence is afterwards. In this case, it's the turtle. Now, to say there was or there were, this is like taking I and putting it in the past tense, because you're not saying there is, you're saying there were. So this is literally just the past tense version of this one. So in this one, you use the third person singular of haber in the present tense. This time, you're using the third person singular, okay, and this is just abbreviated, third person singular, and that is going to be había, okay? Había. That is how you say there was, or there were. This is literally just the past tense version of I, okay? Había. For example, you could say, había un, what's a good example of an, okay, había un oso en la biblioteca, okay? Había un oso en la biblioteca, okay? There was or a bear in the library, okay? Now, you could also make this plural. Había unos osos en la biblioteca, okay? There were some bears in the library. I don't know why this school is getting overrun by animals, but it's probably because it's in Canada. But anyway, this is an example of using the past tense form of I, or in other words, the past tense form of third person singular haber to say there was or there were. Now, how do you say there will be? This is just, again, the third person singular, but this time we're in the future tense, okay? So remember, this is the past tense, okay? Otherwise known as the imperfect. There's like 6 kinds of past tenses, but we're just going to keep it simple. This is just future tense, okay? And you would say habrá, okay? Just habrá, right? So you could say, for example, habrá más comida in, oh, I'm sorry, that's not appearing on the screen, in la fiesta, okay? So you see, habrá más comida en la fiesta. There will be more food at the party, okay? So do you see, it doesn't matter if the thing is singular or plural, you still use the third person singular form of the verb. See here, we made the bears plural. It doesn't become habían, it's just había, all right? Because you're saying there was or there were. It covers both the singular and the plural. And that's the same with all of these. You don't have to change it and make it plural just because you're talking about more than one object. It stays singular. Okay, now that you guys have that understanding, I assume you're advanced enough to translate these. Number one, there isn't enough time. Number two, why wasn't there a king in the town? And number three, there will be peace. How do you translate these? Take a moment, go ahead and pause the video and work on it. Then we'll come back and work on it together. Okay, I assume that you have unpaused the video and that we're ready to move on, so let us begin. There isn't enough time, you would just say, because there is, you would just use I. You would say, no hay tiempo suficiente, okay? There is not enough time. No hay tiempo suficiente. How about why wasn't there a king in the town? Now what you need to do is see how it says wasn't. Now we're in the past tense. So you would start, remember, all the time in Spanish, when you make a question, open up with the upside down question mark. ¿Por qué no había, because we're in the past tense, un rey en el pueblo, okay? Why wasn't there a king in the town? ¿Por qué no había un rey en el pueblo? Now, let us move on to the final one. There will be peace. This one is very simple. There will be, now we're talking future tense. It's just habrá la paz, okay? Habrá la paz, okay? There will be peace. Habrá la paz, okay? So now that you guys understand, this is just a sample of the kinds of things that I would cover. There are lessons far more simple and lessons far more complex. I hope that I am able to help you all reach your goals of understanding Spanish, being comfortable with it, and being fluent, okay? With that being said, aprendamos español. God bless.